So continuing on with our parking lot, once we got the property set to true north, and we have the property line in, which you have right now, and that's as far as you've taken it. Your building should show up in the right location, I believe. We did move it to the right location. And as you can see on mine, I've sketched in the parking that I'm planning on for this building that I have. The code is going to require a certain number of parking spaces depending on the square footage of the building and the use of the building. So you might say, well, you know, a grocery store is a big footprint of a building. What's the code going to require for parking spaces there? Well, they can make an assumption on, okay, the building is 20,000 square feet, and they're going to require one parking space per 200 square foot of building or something like that. That's how the code relates to it. And so during busy times, they can get everybody parked in the parking lot. When it's not so busy, there's going to be an awful lot of open spaces, but that's going to be a code requirement. Apartment buildings has a code requirement of number of parking spaces depending on the size of the units. Is it a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom? A 1-bedroom requires 1 parking space. A 2-bedroom requires 1.5 parking spaces. A 3-bedroom requires 2 parking spaces. So that's kind of the way the code reads. Our office building here is going to be based on a square footage type parking requirement. And I'm not going to have you look that up, but if you did want to, you would go to the zoning ordinances. You'd find out commercial office building space, parking requirements, and it might tell you, depending on the type of business, what might be required. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that right now, but that's where you would find that, under the zoning ordinances. So right now I've put in some parking spaces here. This is all just detail lines, right? It's just annotation detail lines. There's nothing there but just line work. And what I've done is I'm just laying it out. It's at some point we will put it into a topography and create the actual terrain and so forth. But right now I'm just trying to get it to work, so I lay it out the way I want it to be. There's always a requirement for some handicap stalls, and again that's based on the square footage of the building, whether it's 2, 4, 6, or 8 depending on the type of use of the building. Sidewalks, you always want to have some green space if at all possible. Make the parking lot look good, make the property look good. Green space meaning grass or plants or whatever it might be. And entrances and exits to a parking lot are important. You don't want people to be congested once they're in the parking lot. Let's use the example of a grocery store. If you had a grocery store with a parking lot that could hold 200 cars, let's say, and you had one entrance in or out, would that be congestive during busy times, you know, people trying to get into the parking lot or out of the parking lot? So in a lot of cases, if it's a parking lot that big, they might have 3 or 4 different ways in and out of the parking lot. On our project here, it's a fairly small office complex of some sort. I want you to have at least 2, one on either, one on the street, one on the avenue probably would be the best in my recommendation. Okay, so here you can see I could come in here. I've got some parking that's off the front of my building. I've got some parking on the side of the building, and I have some parking behind the building. Okay, so depending on the use of your building, you know, this back entrance could be employees parking behind the building and being able to access the building from behind, and your general customers being able to park out front. I talked in the past about having this property set up so that it actually slopes away to the back side of the building. So we actually have a walkout on the back side, which is down about approximately 5 feet from the main floor. And so we have to get our terrain and our parking lots at different levels. And that's something we probably haven't done before. So first off, let's just look at laying out these streets and so forth. if you have that handout that I gave you when you did the parking lot, it did tell us what the right-of-ways for the streets are on that handout. And I don't have it in front of me, but you probably do. This road that's on the front of the building here along this side is, I believe, called 3M Drive. Is that right? And the right-of-way in front of our project is an 80-foot right-of-way. You can see that. It's kind of small print on there, but I think you'll probably see that it's an 80-foot right-of-way right in front of our building. But once it goes beyond the intersection of, what is this, Wheatland Road or something? Okay. Once you get beyond that, you're in a residential area, and the right-of-way is now 60 feet. Okay, so it's narrower there because that's a residential area and it doesn't require as much turning space and stuff that you might have in a commercial area. Okay, so 3M Drive in front of our project is 80 foot wide. Wheatland Road is also 80 foot wide. And then once you get into the residential area, which you don't have to spend a lot of time on, is 60. The street, however, is going to be pretty much the same width. They could put a wider street up here and here. Obviously, they got the space to do it. But we'll put our street in at 32 feet wide. That's a common street width. And that's not shown on that plan at all, so you might need to write that down, that our streets are going to be 32 feet. That's back of curb to back of curb. That's a typical street width. You know, in some cases, in busier parts of a community, you might have 2 lanes plus a turn lane in the middle or something. Then the street gets wider, obviously, right? It'd be about 45 feet wide or so. Okay, so we can end up with different widths of streets. Okay, so in order to lay those in there, it's just a matter of taking this line work, and we can't, the property line of the building is a continuous line, and we can't explode that or anything. We don't want to explode that. So in order to create this line over here that's similar to it, I would probably go to annotation, detail lines. I think we created one that was called phantom lines. I would probably trace over top of this one. Then I could click on that line and offset it, right? And I'll just offset it 100 feet because I already have one in there. Correction, before I do that, I'll just erase this one. I'll delete that one. And then I could take that line and offset it 80 feet, huh? And then that's how you would create that one, right? Once you've done that, you can go back over to this one and delete it again. And still have your property. Okay, it works the same way for this south property line, or you might say southeasterly property line of our property, is actually a curve, right? So we could, I could delete this one, and I could go and draw a line again using an arc and go from this point to this point, and I can find that just like that. It'll lock onto that same arc, and then I can offset that 80 feet again, and it's going to offset it perfectly. Okay, and then I can just, I could drag that all the way over here if I wanted to, right? But just want it that far. Okay, so we can create that parallel arc by just doing that. Okay, I'm just going to undo, get that back to where I had it. Okay, same thing, you could offset that same line to find these two curving street lines, right? And then just change the line type from phantom to something else, right? Okay, creating these corners, the common corner radius is from the intersection of that point and tangent with these two lines. Okay, so you know, if I didn't have that and I wanted to put that radius in there, I could go again to annotation, detail lines, change them to maybe medium lines. I could go to a circle if I don't even know exactly where those other ones end, and I could draw that out to there. Oops, didn't get it quite the right spot. Best to go over to this straight line. Then I can split that line in a couple of spots, delete that, and to create that. So those are probably the easiest ways to do it. Since we have a wider right-of-way here and a narrower right-of-way here, once you've created that one, if you find the center of this street, you could mirror it down here, and you'll notice it isn't the same corner, but it would be. That's how they would make the intersection a symmetrical intersection all the way around the intersection. Okay. Okay, so that's how you're going to develop your parking spaces, and you know, you don't. Your buildings are in different shapes than mine probably, so you'll have a different configuration of how you're laying it out. If you, if after looking at this handout and finding out how wide the parking lot should be, if you need to move your building farther back, you'll notice here on my building I did end up moving mine back a little bit because I wanted to get the right width of parking lot in here. So you can click on your building. Actually, you'd want to determine that fairly early so that you can click on your property line, because it's your property line you want to move, not your building, right? So you'd want to kind of figure out how your parking lot's going to work, maybe mathematically, to make sure it works, and adjust your setback if you have to. I'm not saying you have to, but you may have to. Okay. This is something I should have talked about earlier, but this little icon in the middle, you remember when we rotated our property to be true north, that we actually clicked on that and got this information and made our adjustments there? Okay. Well, what I should have talked to you about is that this little icon is actually kind of like a benchmark for your property. And ideally, if I'd have thought about this earlier, ideally I'd have laid out my property with this icon on one of these intersections. So right at the intersection of one of the corners of your property is where your benchmark might be. So your client owns a piece of property, it gets surveyed, and there's property pins in those corners, and when the builder goes out to build the building, if he know what the benchmark was at the corner of the building, then he could set the heights of everything for his property off of that. So ideally, that could have been over here. I'm going to, let's see, if we just go to, okay. On the annotation tab, you'll look up here and you'll see a couple of things we've never talked about, and that is spot elevation and spot coordinate. Okay, this is why you might want to set your property icon at one of the corners of the building, because if I go over here and I take spot coordinate and I hover over one of these corners, I can set the coordinate of that corner, and that tells me that that corner location is north 56 feet 4 and 31/32, east 121 feet 9 and 9/16. From where? From our benchmark, right? So in other words, if I went and took a detail line, and I started at the center of this, and I went directly north, that should be true north, should be that way, and I went 56 foot, I'm just going to make it 4, yeah, it should be that way, and then if I went this way, 121 foot 9, I should end up pretty close to that corner, right? So that's how that benchmark thing works. Okay, so that would be good information for the contractor to have for placing the building correctly, right? If we had done our benchmark in the right location. Not to say that we couldn't use our benchmark right here as long as we identify where it's at, right? Through dimensioning. We could throw some dimensions on that says that's where our benchmark is. And oftentimes on a project, a benchmark is the top of the fire hydrant on this, along the street. So that's where you'd want to put that if you're truly drawing a site plan for a project. Okay. All right, so let's say that you've got this parking lot figured out. So this is going to take some time to kind of get all this line work just kind of figured out. And then we want to go to our topography. Well, I've already put some topography on here. And I'll just unhide that for now. Okay, so it's on here. And if we look at our building as an isometric, I just threw that on pretty quickly, so right now it's just black dirt, right? There's the parking isn't on there, it's just the topography of the site. But you can see, if I rotate this around, you'll see that it does taper down around the corner of the building. And I have this lower level, right? So once you've created your topography or the shape of your terrain around your project, you know, I might at some point, I'm not going to require that you do this, by the way, but if I might take a look at this and say, boy, I'd sure like that masonry to go all the way to the grade, not have this exposed foundation. So then I'd go back to my foundation plan, make some adjustments in the top of foundation, and put some masonry on there too, right? So those are things you could do at some point if we had the time to do that. But we could also berm it. We could put in some retaining walls to height it and have the grade higher, things like that. So there's all kinds of things you can do to make your property interesting. But this is just one example of how that terrain changes. Okay, so let's go back and look at it from the site plan. And I'm just going to delete my topography. So now I'm back to not having that on there. We all have done this in the past, but we've done it with pretty flat lots, right? So in this case, we're going to do it with, I'm going to go to Site, and I'm going to go to Topography. And so I want to start placing points, right? So my floor line is level 0, right? My floor line is level 0, so I want to get the floor line around my building first off. So I'm going to go down minus 4 inches. Okay, so I'm going to have my topography around my building 4 inches down on the front of the building, right? So I'll start in here, and I'll pick a point here at minus 4, minus 4, minus 4. Coming around the building this way, I'll probably come back a ways at minus 4. And now I got to start dropping, right? So now I'm going to go change it to a minus 5'4", because on my plan anyway, that lower level is 5 foot lower. So I'm going to go back to this back corner now. That's a minus 5'4", minus 5'4". And then I'm going to come over here and go to this corner and say that's a minus 5'4". Okay, then I'm coming back up to this side, so I'm going to go maybe a minus 4'4" at about here, and minus 3'4" at about here, and back to -4 inches there. Okay, and now I could work around my building and continue on with this, and let's go to a -1'4", and I'll go out here along this curve. So I'm going to lower it roughly a foot out in these areas. But now I'm dropping again, so now I got to go minus maybe I'll just make it easy and go 6'4", and I'll be a foot lower than the building here. And I'm doing this pretty fast just to demonstrate, but you'd probably want to fine-tune it a little bit. And out here. And then I'm going to start coming back up. And let's just see how that looks. And then we'll go. Okay, so you can see that that's worked out pretty good. Okay, and you can fine-tune that, of course. Let's go back to the site plan. If things aren't, if you get this done and all of a sudden something looks wrong. I had this happen the first time I did it. If I click on my site and I go edit the surface, maybe by mistake, this point over here, I forgot to put the minus sign in. Let's see what happened if that happened. I got a little sled hill over there, right? And maybe your terrain does do something like that. But that can happen as you're developing your plan. And when you're looking straight down on it, you don't see things like that. And then all of a sudden you rotate it to a point and you say, well, what happened there? Well, go back and click on your topography and check points and see if you missed a minus sign or if you entered something wrong. Okay, so then, of course, once we get our property fully developed, let's go back to the site plan. Once we get our terrain fully on our property, then we can go back and put on the subregions, right, that create the parking lots and so forth. Sidewalks, parking lots, landscaping, things like that. When you bring in landscaping, you do have to set the height of it. So, if you're putting a tree out here on the front of your property, it's going to relate to 0. So if your grade is dropping a foot, you're going to want to change its base point to 0. And sometimes you have to go and look at it isometrically to see if it's sitting above the ground or in the ground. You get down to 5 feet below here, you don't want a tree 5 feet up in the air, floating up there. You want to bring it down, or a car. The cars can float too, or they can be in the ground. You want to make sure you get them at the right elevations. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is do that and start developing your site plan now. You know how to change the material so that would be grass instead of dirt and so forth. And I'll be around to answer any questions that might come up. Okay?